Okay, so this is going to be on the history of photography. It's going to be the first of two. And we're going to look first at Joseph Nepsi's view of the courtyard. And that's basically the first ever photograph produced in France. The English like to say that they were the first to invent photography, but actually, they were the first to invent photography using the paper process, and that's William Henry Fox Talbot, who we'll talk about in a minute. Uh, the other famous, of course, photographer is Louis Daguerre, and that process was on metal. Um, and of course, the daguerreotypes became super. Uh, they became very popular in America, particularly. Okay, and then here's another early one. This is Laycock Abbey by William Henry Fox Talbot. Again, the first to use paper. And then this is The Open Door. And the question comes up with a new sort of artistic mode. What do you decide to actually photograph? And in the case of early photography, it has to be something that's stationary um, because the exposure time is very long. And then here's botanical specimens. And then Talbot's Three Daughters. Just kind of a haunting photograph, to be honest. Okay, and then Hippolyte Bayard is here. And I really didn't know anything about him until quite recently. So this is self portrait. And then you've got the three feathers. And then you've got Roger Fenton, who really is a breakout star of the 19th century. And so here he is in the Valley of the Shadow of Death because he was documenting the Crimean War. That's what that's about. And these are famous ones. And then here is a woman dressed in a hoop skirt tending to a wounded soldier. And then here's combatants of the Crimean War. Okay, next is somebody that I have appreciated for many years. This is Julia Margaret Cameron. And this is Mrs. Herbert Duckworth three times. Cameron loved to photograph her. And so it'd be interesting to kind of think about the similarities and differences between the years. And then here is Pomona, 1872 on the right. There's a sort of ethereal look to some of these works. And then it says, I have seen the world. King Theodore, who was King Theodore's son, who was Ethiopian, I believe. All right, then you've got the parting of Lancelot and Guinevere. She was very much into Arthurian legends. And then King Lear allotting his kingdom to his three daughters. Here is Alfred Lord Tennyson to the left, a very famous literary figure. And then you've got Gareth and Lynette in the middle. And then Vivian and Merlin on the right. Okay. And then last but not least, Sir John Herschel. That's a good one. Okay. Now we're going to go to Matthew Brady. And on the left is a portrait of him by Charles Loring Elliott. So it's kind of fun to think about, well, what are the differences between how somebody is painted and how somebody is photographed? And there seems to be sort of a very similar thing going on. And then you've got this very interesting study of how much Abe Lincoln aged. On the left is 1860, and only 5 years later is Lincoln. The war obviously wore on him. Okay, and then here he is with his tall stovepipe hat. He was always taller than anybody else, usually. And then, very famous one. Um, where is this one at? Yeah. Oh, this is Alexander Gardner, home of the rebel sharpshooter. Okay, and then I think we've seen this one before. This is the American West. This is Timothy O'Sullivan. Remember that he was also an American photographer, a little bit in the war. And so, but we're skipping one and we're going right to Sand Dunes, Carson Desert, Nevada. And then, let's see, Pyramid and Domes, Pyramid Lake, Nevada. And then finally, Carlton Watkins, Cape Horn near Cecilia. Now, Carlton Watkins printed his photographs very, very large, and they usually were bought by railroad executives. This one's kind of fun. Solitary Tree in Yosemite on the left. And anything else? Oh, no, Solitary Tree is obviously on the right, and then there's the famous photograph that you took of the sort of the tunnel through the tree. Okay, and then you have Edward Muybridge. We've talked about him a lot before, that he was hired by Leland Stanford to prove that horses at some point have all four of their hoofs off the ground. And then this is a human figure in motion by Muybridge, and he, of course, is he's an early film creator, I guess you could say. And then Thomas Eakins also was early in the development of cinema. This is called Double Jump. Now let's go to France and Nadar, and I've had a homework on this. Print or photograph or print, and we have it right here. And then we also saw this one recently too. This is Sarah Bernhardt. She was the most famous actress of her day, on the left. And then you have George Sand on the right. Okay, so let's go to some photojournalism. This is going to be a short lecture, you guys. This is Jacob Ritz, and he was a photographer during the progressive era, in which people were trying to expose the poverty and corruption of, particularly in New York City, where this was taken. This is Italian mother and her baby. And then you've got lodgers in a crowded Bayard Street tenement. So he's trying to get the government to move forward with the poor. And then you've got Lewis Hines. This is one of the most famous photographs in all of American art history. It's showing child labor, the horrible conditions of the 19th century. And then you've got Italian family seeking lost baggage. And then you've got Breaker Boys. Makes us all feel lucky that we are alive in the 21st century. Okay, and then you've got some more pioneers. This is Agate, Shop Window, Taylor Dummies. And then you've got Alfred Stieglitz, The Terminal on the left, and Winter Fifth Avenue on the right. Then you've got Steerage, his most famous photograph, and actually people are getting on the ship to go back to Europe. I just learned that a couple of years ago, actually. It's not people getting disembarking and coming to New York City. Okay, and there's Alfred Stieglitz, and on the right is his wife, Georgia O'Keeffe. Here is Hannah Hope's very famous the cutout of the kitchen knife series. And then you've got Radiant Dancer on the right. And then the guy that basically invented, along with Hannah Hoke, the photo collage idea. It's self-portrait with police commissioner with this one. And then last but not least, James Van Der Zee, the photographer of the Harlem Renaissance. And on the left, couple in raccoon coats. On the right, Jean-Michel Basquiat with cat. And I think it's pretty amazing that he lived until he was 93. 97. There you go. Okay, very short one. First of two on photography history.